Welcome, current viewers on Facebook Live and future listeners wherever you may be. We are coming at you with another episode of Talk Story with More Equitable Democracy. I'm Heather Villanueva. I'm More Equitable Democracy's Deputy Director, and I'm based in Seattle, Washington. I have over a decade's worth of experience in community organizing for racial justice, and I am super excited to be here today to talk with Brian. First things first, we are coming at you today, or I am coming at you today from Seattle, the ancestral home to the Duwamish, Muckleshoot, and Stillaguamish people. And our guest today is Brian Smith. Hey there. Can you tell us about the land that you're on today?
Yeah, so I'm in Eugene, which is the ancestral home of the Cayuse, Umatilla, Walla Walla, Kalapuya, Chalamela, Wainaphelli, Grand Ronde, and Siletz people. I might have mispronounced a few of those. So.
All right. Well, let's talk story. Thank you very much for that. For those of you who have turned in before, you would remember that talk story is a Hawaiian pidgin term that means to share, converse, share experiences, be raw, be authentic, get to know each other, just really, like bond with those people that you're sharing with. And Hawaiian history has been passed down this way through oral language and stories from generation to generation, and still talking story is a practice that's still alive and well, and it's a part of Native Hawaiian and local culture in the Hawaiian Islands. So we are here talking story with leaders of color who are reshaping and transforming our democracy. And I'm just so excited to dig in. So today we are joined with Brian Smith, hey, who is an enrolled member of the Muskogee Nation and co-founder of the Tribal Democracy Project. Brian's first taste of politics was drafting policy positions for a congressional candidate. And this immediately led to a career in electoral politics and campaign consulting, the masterminding. Brian's work is focused on issues of equity, believing the greatest barriers to voters and candidates from marginalized communities are institutional in nature. And this led him to co-found the Tribal Democracy Project with the mission of promoting democratic reforms such as proportional ranked choice voting and implementing get out the vote systems in tribal communities. Brian earned his degree from Southern Oregon University, where he studied mathematics, economics, and has lived in Eugene, Oregon since 2009, occasionally sneezing every couple of years because of the crazy pollen. But was born and raised in Arizona, making him a lifelong Arizona Wildcats and Phoenix Suns fan. And I hear you enjoy spending your free time with your partner Hannah and Samson the dog in the outdoors of Oregon, sometimes sneezing, sometimes not.
That is correct.
Cool. Well, I just said a lot about you, but the best stories come from yourself, about yourself. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and where does your story with activism begin?
Yeah, so I mean, you hit a lot of it in kind of the summary right there. But I mean, essentially, what happened? I grew up in Arizona. I went to college in Indiana for a little while. Then I transferred out to Southern Oregon University, and this was like 23 years ago or something like that, 22 years ago. And that's down in Ashland, Oregon, which is Jackson County, Southern Oregon. And after I got done there. Number of things where I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I thought about, becoming an actuary, given my background in mathematics and economics, or maybe go to grad school. But what happened was I also had always had an interest in politics. And then I think it was right after the 2004 elections, I'm like, maybe I can hop in and do something about, with the way the election went. I wasn't happy with that. So I started volunteering locally with the local Democratic Party. And then there was a congressional race in 2006, and it popped up. And it was a good opportunity because the candidate was not going to win in the general election. So they're open to just letting neophytes hop in and help on the campaign for free, right? So, and that's really, if you want to go to work in politics, that's how you do it. You start volunteering, doing basic stuff, making phone calls, knocking on doors, stuffing envelopes, stuff like that. And then the next cycle, you can kind of move up. And I promise you, the pay is not good at first, if ever. But if you have an interest in this, and that's just the way you do it. So with, like you mentioned, I reached out to the candidate. I'm like, hey, I can help you with drafting policies on, maybe immigration, healthcare, stuff like that, because I have some insights into how policy actually works, the technical aspect. And full disclosure, this actually doesn't really matter a lot in political campaigns, right? But I didn't know that at the time. Then hopping in there, the actual mechanics of campaigning, as far as analysis of your voters and how do you get the message to the right voters, what's actually important given the context of this campaign, right? Elections are different, a congressional race, partisan race, and a primary is different from the general election. And then nonpartisan races, school board, city council, right? There are different kinds of races, ballot measures. They all have different features, right? And
Right.
and different kinds of voters vote in different kinds of elections, right? So there are a number of variables. And what I realized was like, oh, this is a resource allocation problem. That's just economics. It's just mathematics, and they're actually
There's your
analytical in
mathematics
nature.
degree.
Yeah. So got me hooked. And, it's through that whole time, I was working in Ashland, Jackson County a lot. And a number of different kinds of races, anywhere from, U.S. Senate all the way down to, judge, district attorney, all over the place, right? And kind of my niche was really profiling your voters, analyzing non-affiliated voters. And there are ways to use essentially data analytics to really kind of pinpoint what's going on, so you don't waste a lot of money on the folks you shouldn't be, type of thing. And coming from areas where, the party was at a registration disadvantage and elections were tough, you had to be really smart with your money when you spend it. So I was able over the years to kind of develop tools. And so that's how I kind of stayed in campaign management. And then in the past couple of election cycles, you get a skill set under your belt. And you realize, okay, now you get to pick and choose where you want to put your time instead of having to just see what jobs are offered. You get the
Beg
opportunity
for
to say,
jobs.
hey, yeah, this is where I want to focus.
Yeah.
And really it became, marginalized BIPOC communities in rural Oregon. And so that's why, I met Jalen Suppa from the Confederated Tribes of Warp Springs, ran her campaign for school board. And then we're like, you know what, there are a lot of things we can be doing to help other candidates like her. And that's a lot of what my focus became. So.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that story. And I kind of feel a little bit of kinship because I also started out volunteering and then like that's how I got into politics. I think I was working for an advocacy organization, but then after that I didn't really know what I was going to do, and so I volunteered for the Obama campaign, or I volunteered for I guess with the Democrats, and then that was working on the coordinated campaign here in Washington. And they were like, I was like, I just want to volunteer, and they're like, actually, you kind of know a lot of people. Can we hire you? And I was like, oh yeah. And of course, I got like $1,000 for a month of GOTV where I never
Yeah.
got to sleep. But it was the most amazing. I mean, it was the most amazing campaign. It was Obama's first win, and so it was like and we still had polling stations in Washington, so people were like, which we don't anymore. People were like getting on the buses and carrying people, I mean, willingly to the polling stations, and it was super fun. But that's how I got my first taste in politics too, just like putting yourself in there to just
Yeah.
like be exposed.
I remember the excitement in that first Obama campaign in 2008. So I was in Medford in Southern Oregon. I was running a state house race. And then we were sharing a campaign office with, this was Jeff Merkley when he was running for the first time, who is now, who's been a senator since then, right? And so I was working a lot with their organizers. And then the Obama team was in town. And just to talk about the excitement behind that campaign, we had a coordinated campaign team meeting to make sure everybody's not overlapping or coordinating where they can.
Right.
And the Obama organizer mentioned how, yeah, I just sent an email and 50 people showed up for a canvas yesterday, just randomly, like on a Friday. And we're like,
it's like a dream.
We will call 200 people and get 3 people to show up. And we have to actually cold call them and really pull, where he just can send an email and everybody just shows up. And these are canvassers, right? Which is not phone bankers, not, texting. It was people were willing to go door to door. It was a really exciting campaign and not something you see a whole lot of. So
Seriously. Yeah. That was just a really interesting moment in time to be in politics. That's so true and so cool. Okay, one more follow-up question. I think I want to move on, and I'm kind of cheating because you might be able to reveal this fact in the next thing, but I have to ask you explicitly, as a math person, what would you say your level of identifying as a nerd is? Are you like I'm a like 10 is like I really really identify as a nerd and a geek, and then 0 is like no, don't call me that. So like on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you feel like you're at?
okay, so I probably got to honestly. I don't tell people this, but I probably put myself at a 10. The reason is if you look at
Yes.
my personal library, there's nothing fun, right? It's math, economics, philosophy, and when we're saying philosophy, it's like Kant, Descartes, Karl Popper, that kind of stuff. Um,
I don't even
and
know who that is. That's cool. Okay.
it's philosophy, a lot of philosophy of science, right? And it it's not to say that I wouldn't enjoy reading fiction, and it's not to say I don't read. When people ask, like, "Do you read?" It's easy just to say no because when I do read a lot, it's just nothing fun. It's more. It's not, and I'm not going to claim that I understand everything I read. Right? It takes me a while, but I'd much prefer a technical paper on policy rather than even the New York Times write up that describes it. Right? I'd actually rather click on the link to go to. Okay, and it comes
Hmm.
to it's anything. It's not just like one thing to read a poll and the outcome, but okay, what was their methodology, right?
Right.
And kind
Yeah.
of dig deep into that. That's what I'm interested in. So I guess we would place me on
Mm,
the nerd side, pretty high up there. So
pretty high up there. Okay. And I also noticed your chair kind of looks like a gaming chair. So are you not that kind of nerd, or you kind of are that kind of nerd like
never, nope, no,
that?
that was this
Okay.
is it's actually not my chair. It I was like you could. I really tried to like video games. Obviously, when I was, the last game I really played a lot was probably Super Mario Kart on the Super Nintendo. I
Oh
think I played
yeah.
James Bond on the Nintendo 64. The problem is I did that for the first quarter in college, and my grades showed it. So I'm like, I can't do that anymore. But after that, yeah, it's not to say that it's just not something that I don't know. It was time, but also doing it. I'm like, this actually takes more effort than what I expected. I thought this would be,
Right?
like watching a movie or something like that. Like this is you got to get good at this. So no, not definitely didn't go in that direction. I try to get outside any chance I get. So
Got you. Okay. So you're not the kind of nerd that goes into the fantasy sci-fi realm. You are the kind of nerd that wants to stick your head in a book and some data and be like,
yeah.
delicious. All right. Okay. Okay. Good.
Well, okay.
Thank you very
Just
much for indulging me in that. Oh,
you're
go
welcome.
ahead.
There's one caveat. Like end of the night when I need to clear my mind to sleep, I can't get into stuff like that. So what I'll do is I'll just watch garbage TV. So it's not that I won't watch a good movie. It's usually just once. But if I'm doing something, it is in the horror sci-fi genre, to where whether
Oh,
it has to
okay.
do with zombies, something like that. Um, what I'm notorious for doing is just getting on Amazon Prime and looking at previews of horrible movies because I'm not sure if I want to commit to 2 hours. But if I see the preview to the next preview to the next preview, all of a sudden 30 minutes have gone by. Time to go to sleep. So
I feel like I learned so much about you. Oh my God. That's amazing. That is really amazing. And I really want to know what your like guilty pleasure, like the worst thing you've ever watched is. But we'll say this. We'll save that later. Okay, I really want to play this game with you now, even more. So we've done this with other guests on the show. It's a game called My People, My People. So basically, we're gonna learn more about each other, basically using inside jokes. And so how it goes is like I'll say, okay, my people, the smell of fermented shrimp makes my people drool. And you might respond like, "My people will not answer your question until they're good and ready to." I don't know if that's true, but I just made that up. And then we'll just like look at each other and be like, "What does that mean?" Or maybe we'll know and we'll like
yeah.
laugh. Ha 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 ha. Okay, but are you ready?
Okay, yeah, I might have to dig deep for this, but let's go.
Okay,
Uh,
okay, let's do this.
yeah,
Start the clock.
okay.
Okay, I'll start. Okay, my people, when they want to know how your vacation went, they don't ask you, "How'd your vacation go?" They say, "What did you eat there?" Okay, your turn.
Okay, that's actually. Let me start simple. My people love dogs, and it's almost like you know they're people, which and you saw that with my profile pic. So yeah, let's go with that.
Okay, okay, okay.
All right.
My people grew up speaking three languages, even though I only grew up speaking one. Wah, wah.
Okay. Um, so let's see. My people um, like to scare their children and get them in line with, it's basically folk tales and supernatural folk tales, right? Just so like, hey, get out of line, the Stigini's coming for you, type of thing. So,
Ooh, I know some of those too. Okay, okay. My people are no longer, speaking of children, grossed out by boogers and poop. And we've touched a lot of both of those things. Ugh.
yeah. Uh, my people are never in a hurry. And that's not necessarily speaking about me, but my people, not really in a hurry. Like it's live in this moment right now. Take your time. We're not here forever. And what do we really value? So,
Yeah. Ooh, that was a good one to end on. But I also like how you said it's like not really you because I'm like, how does a political consultant
yeah. Yeah, I had to get that
like
out of
not
my
worry about
system.
I love it. Okay, all right. Let's we got a little bit of mystery, a little intrigue. Like let's get really explicit about I keep saying explicit. Let's get explicit about these things. I want to hear more about the communities that shape you and your work. Like who do you describe as your people?
So it's interesting in my story, and I think there are different kinds of folks. So as you mentioned, I'm a member of the Muskogee Nation, but kind of the arc of my life where I remember a lot of stuff when I was very young, but I kind of was out of that growing up. Like I said, so the Muskogee are out of Oklahoma. I actually grew up in Arizona, so I wasn't, in the community. Um, and it's really something later on in life where I'm like, okay, I actually or I want to kind of get back in touch with what my culture is. So there's just kind of this gap in between. And I remember some stuff from my early childhood, or a lot of things actually. Um, but it what's interesting is like even still growing up in Arizona, that is far you have two the largest reservation in the nation, I think, is the Navajo, right there, and then you also have something like 23 tribal communities in Arizona. Um, and as far as percentage of the population, that and Oklahoma might be the two, but I don't know. I'm not going to say that for sure. But as far as a number of natives just in the population, and you have kind of a mix. You have your rural communities, right, and your tribal communities, and also you have a large urban population in Phoenix, and you probably see similar things like that. Um, and
Hmm.
so, although going to high school, I went to high school in a small town, and we had an Apache Yavapai reservation there. And so, if you went to kind of this rural town, there were a lot of folks from the Latinx community, a lot of folks from the Native community, kind of mixed in, but also it was a very conservative environment, which reminds me a lot of Oregon in these rural areas, right? But this is before it's interesting going through that, and you have your awareness, particularly if you're a person of color, where there's definitely racism there. There's definitely things going on, certain elements, right? But you don't have the heightened awareness like we do now, where it's just kind of like, oh, this is just what you deal with, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And it
Right.
was more without kind of without the focus of like, hey, no, this isn't cool. What's going on here? Type of thing, to a certain
Yeah.
extent, because we're talking about talking about the 80s and 90s in that time era.
So long
So it's
ago.
kind
I
of
don't know what those times were like.
yeah,
Not at all. I don't.
it, but it's so it working kind of as an adult, and going to school. Like I said, I went to school in Indiana, which was not a very diverse area at the time.
Mhm.
And then some moving into Oregon, even Oregon. I would argue a lot has changed over the past decade or so, and we're seeing, you saw with the census data, as far as communities of color growing. But at the time, 20 years ago, kind of the same thing. Like you look at it, and,
Right.
and you're like, okay, this is not a diverse state. That's just how it is, type of thing. And so, I think coming from you know areas where there is more diversity to that, that was definitely interesting. but it also, you kind of adapt to that, even if you don't know it. But working in politics, there's a certain, we talked about, like, okay, there's definitely this hustle culture aspect, but also certain things that you kind of adapt to navigate systems, and you see it in politics, to where you just have to function, right?
Mhm.
And on a lot of it, it's not necessarily okay, right? And we see this with candidates of color who are just kind of thrown into this system and expected to do things a certain way, which doesn't necessarily, there's a cultural difference, and it's not necessarily the
Mhm.
right way, but it's what's
Right.
expected. Um,
Mhm.
and so, just from my background, being kind of in these systems for a very long time, now when I'm working with candidates of color who are, say, coming from a rural tribal community or Latinx community, who are like, why are people doing things this way? What is going on? I'm like, well, this is why. Here's what you can expect, right? And it's not to say that you put up with it and adapt to it. I actually don't believe that, but to have a
Mhm.
recognition of what you're dealing with and how, the structures in place, the dominant culture, how they view things. I'm very familiar with it because I had to work in that system, and
Mhm.
personally, I had to adapt to that system, or I thought I did, right? So
Right.
that kind of gives an advantage to helping candidates that are kind of thrust into that, and to navigate these systems, to have knowledge of what's going on. I think it is pretty helpful. So
They must be so thankful to have someone who understands that, because I can just imagine, if you go with it, it's hard enough to be a candidate of color, but to be a candidate of color working with a consultant that doesn't get who you are and you know, who
yeah,
your people are. I mean, I know of a consultant who like copied and pasted one Latina's bio for another and thought that it was gonna fly, and I'm like, one of them is an immigrant, one of them's not.
so it's
You can't just do that.
Yeah, no, and people don't get that. Everything is, particularly folks are viewed, particularly people of color. And let's just talk about, Latinx communities. That's diverse right there. I mean, where are you from? All
Mhm.
right, and it's completely different, and people don't get that. I remember just. I worked on a congressional campaign. I'm not going to say who it is, but this person got through a primary. I wasn't involved in the primary. I jumped in for the general election, and one of the things I was working on was Latinx community outreach. And so I was looking to hire organizers within those communities. And the first thing
Mhm.
they pointed at, and they're like, this literature, this Spanish language translation you have is garbage. I mean, who did this? It doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm not that guy. I actually don't speak Spanish. And it's because they just brought in someone to write
Phoned it
all of this
in.
campaign material, and it didn't make sense to the communities they were trying to talk to. So I mean, we got it fixed, but it kind of gives you an idea of, and in all fairness, the campaign had really good intentions and we're looking to fix all of these things, so there was an awareness.
Mhm.
But it does tell you that, um, if you go about this the wrong way, you're going to make mistakes, and you wonder why you can't win votes from a certain community, right?
Mhm.
First,
Mhm.
my argument is you need candidates from these communities, and that's
Right.
kind of, what of a lot of the focus that we've been having recently is like, it's not just about asking for support from these communities; it's about empowering these communities and
Right.
empowering their
Mhm.
voters, and that starts with people from their communities running for office, and pushing them to the forefront. So.
Yes, for sure. Oh my god, I love it. I can go all day about this, but I want to ask you about the Tribal Democracy Project
Yeah.
itself, which was created, like you said, to address systemic issues of voter disenfranchisement of Oregon's tribal communities through electoral reforms and implementing get out the vote operations. So, can you just speak to how those issues give Native voters, American Indians, more power?
Yeah. So, let me go through why we came
Yes.
upon this and why we formed. So I mentioned, the co-founder is Jalen Suppa, who is from, member of the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. And what motivated us to do this was we, got together. I helped her on her school board race, for the special district elections in 2021. And then what we figured out, and the reason I did this, I actually reached out to her. I didn't know her, but I knew some folks that she knew. I'm like, hey, get me connected. I see some things in her area from an analytical perspective, right? Just looking at the numbers, I'm like, I see some potential here that I think a lot of people are missing. As far as, you know, it looks like you can't win, but you can if you do things right, at least. And that's just based on what I saw from the numbers. What Jaylin brought to the table was she knows her community, right? And that's important. So not everything is a numbers game. I would say more of it is how well do you know your community? How well do you respond to your community? So it has to do with a candidate. It just can't be any candidate, but also what's going on there, because like even all communities are different, right? So what would happen in on Warm Springs would be different than the Latinx community in Madras. Warm Springs would be different from Klamath tribes. So there's no cookie cutter approach. But either way, hop in there, and we realized we've got an opportunity. We were able to raise the money and the resources to actually sponsor a slate of candidates of women from Warm Springs to run for special district elections, whether school board, education service district, their equivalent of the Parks and Rec. So we had 4 candidates on there. And they all did a lot of really good work in the community. So they were very well known. And the idea with the numbers is like, hey, you have the lowest turnout in federal and state elections. You need the highest turnout in this election to kind of get this done, period. You just need those numbers. But we can apply some things that we know about organizing and networking and outreach. It's not just about, and so what a lot of people think is like, we'll just hire some organizers, throw them into the community, start knocking on doors. That doesn't work. I promise you.
Right.
It can, but like for certain communities, not, but you know, not for tribal communities. It's more like, who do you know?
Mm-hmm.
And one
Mm-hmm.
thing that popped out was Jaylin mentioned, like, oh yeah, we had a tribal election with 80% turnout, which is, given that most folks are not affiliated, that is crazy high, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in a special district election, turnout might be below 20% for those precincts. So there's a huge
Uh-huh.
gap there. And I'm like, okay, so this isn't a low turnout community. That's important. And that's an important
Right.
distinction. They just don't turn out
Yeah.
for state and federal elections. So we put together a model that was very culturally specific. You have a number of folks in households. There are also a lot of barriers to entry. For instance, in Oregon, you can vote by mail. The problem is if nobody in the one in Warm Springs has a mailbox, they have to walk that into the post office, right? Which is right across the street from the ballot drop box. So there really is no difference. The county doesn't do voters pamphlet statements, right? So the voter education aspect that you take for granted is not there. And also the confusion on the voting. There was a lag time, for instance, for people getting ballots on Warm Springs, where we were seeing people getting them a week and a half after they're mailed out, which was ridiculous. And so there's a number of things we had to address. Also, voter registration. In Oregon, it's automatic, and presumably over 90% of people who are qualified to vote are registered, but not on Warm Springs, because that means you have a DMV issued ID, right? And one thing I noticed is, and Jaylin told me this, I'm like, no, this makes no sense. That can't be the case. And sure enough, doing voter registration coupled with other events, and we'd see like 30 people sometimes who were not registered that were adults, which were eye-popping numbers. So there are a number of things going on that we wanted to address just logistically. And then the community outreach with the candidates who are also the organizers. And we put together our own kind of database system where we applied the technology with the personal outreach. And this was during COVID. We actually weren't doing a lot of door-to-door because of COVID. Obviously, we're still in the pandemic, but this is where there was definitely a no-no to actually knock on a door and talk to someone.
Mm-hmm.
With all that said, at the end of that election, with our get out the vote that we implemented, Warm Springs tripled its expected turnout. They were the highest performing precincts in Jefferson County, and they beat every county in neighboring Deschutes, which is Bend, except for 2 out of 50. And those 2
Oh my
precincts are
God.
just really old people that always vote, and they only beat Warm Springs by a couple percentage points, right?
Wow.
So like we're on to something. And
Yeah.
I know this is a long way to get to what we were doing. So there we had a template that we just needed to fine tune, and we felt like this is possible, or maybe we can adapt this not just to Warm Springs but to other tribal communities where you have It's one thing to already go to Portland where, the urban Indian population is kind of spread out and it's tougher to ID folks. But on Warm Springs, we know that 95% of folks are members of the tribe, right? Or other areas that are like this where we can maybe do something similar. So it's not just about the system, it's also about the candidates, right? And it just can't be even anyone from Warm Springs they run. They have to be folks that are working for the community and people recognize it. So we feel like we have a template that we want to reproduce. So that's one aspect of Tribal Democracy Project. The other aspect, right after this campaign, which, by the way, 2 out of the 4 candidates won. Jalen, who is supposed to lose by 20 points, she lost by 55 votes. However, we know that we're getting really close, right?
Yeah.
And so we think is pretty unprecedented. And it has
Totally.
everything to do with the women that ran. The next thing we moved on, like, okay, this is when we've been talking to some folks, and redistricting was coming up. And I had an interest because I'm like, hey, we just need to tweak your House district to get the first state rep from a local Oregon tribe elected to the legislature. Like we knew we had the coalition in place, but as it was, the Warm Springs community and Madras was racially gerrymandered, meaning their voting power was diluted by some weird map drawing that brought in a county that didn't belong. I'm like, we just got to tweak this, and we can get to a place. And when I say tweak, not gerrymandering on our end, but respecting communities of interest, right? We get somebody elected, and it felt like, you've got Democratic supermajorities, you got a Democratic governor, right? And that's just the political reality. Although that was not our angle; it was communities of interest. I'm like, this shouldn't be too difficult to, with this redistricting, to get this tweaked, and we have the opportunity of having a candidate. And there are also other areas that were racially gerrymandered previously, whether the Klamath tribes, Umatilla. I'm like, this has got to be a slam dunk to get this corrected. So Jalen worked for an organization for basically community outreach. I contracted out through a nonprofit to essentially draw the map that represented tribal community interests with tribal community input. Long process. We can get into that. Long story short, the worst outcome possible. At least 2 tribal communities were racially gerrymandered again. Warm Springs got even worse. I mean, it's crazy the way they just cut that community, both communities, right in half. Separated Warm Springs from Madras, which is where all their kids go to school, where people go to work. Attached it to, communities on the eastern side of the state. I mean, there's like a 200-mile difference of the way they drew this map. And another format I can get into that. A lot of sour grapes on my end, I'll tell you that. But
yeah,
our end conclusion was maybe this isn't the way to go. Maybe we look at other systems that we want to focus on to get folks elected. And that's where we started talking about proportional ranked choice voting. So Tribal Democracy Project is formed to address get out the vote, democratic systems reform. We definitely want to keep talking about redistricting and the issues. We feel that overall, a lot of people get this wrong, even people with good intentions, even with independent commissions. A lot of times they are partisan commissions, and a lot of times they put up more barriers to entry on their commissions to marginalized communities. But we think that the systems that we really want to focus on, first and foremost, proportional ranked choice voting, get rid of these winner-take-all elections, because it's just not it's not democratic, period. It does not reflect these communities. There's no way. I mean, you could approach 45% of a vote share and have like a county commission or a school district with 5 folks on there, and none of them represent you in your community. That's crazy. And it's just not democratic. So
we're with you on that. Hey,
yeah.
Thank you so much. I love all that background. That was really super insightful, and just, yeah, it's like so impactful, the work that you all did. That's really, really amazing. So good job. And I'm so excited about your organization and what y'all are doing. And I feel like that nerdiness is just like, it's just shining, right? It's a very important asset to the work that you're doing. So it's critical. Okay, well, so I want to talk a little bit about trust. So, Native folks, American Indians have skepticism about American democracy, right? There has been no treaty that has gone unbroken, right?
Right.
So, s- you said it's important that tribal democracy does build trust in voting. So, what is that like? What does that look like?
Yeah. So this is one of the things that what also we recognize is there's a need. It's one thing to get the institutions fixed, set in place, right? Um, and I don't know, there's not necessarily a cause and effect. All of these things kind of work together, but the other element is to build that trust in the system. Um, but the problem is that there's like this negative reinforcement cycle, is that the way to phrase it, where you get disenfranchised, right? Your voting power is taken away by the folks who you thought were your friends in the first place. Um, you can't win elections, right? You do everything you can, you're still going to lose. And oh, by the and it just takes away more trust when the goal was like folks will go in and I'm like, oh, you got to get people to vote. I'm like, well, why would they? And that's my question is why would they vote based on the way things are designed
Right,
right now? A lot
right.
of what we want to do, and like I said, we just started. We just got our fiscal sponsorship through Common Cause Education Fund. So we're still like we got to get a website and all these other things up. What's funny is we're actually already working on this stuff. And so we just kind of put the other logistical stuff aside. So we have a lot to do. But one of the main things that we're looking at is getting into tribal communities, talking to tribal councils and saying, hey, um, there, there are ways to empower your community at the state level, at the local level, outside of your community, potentially at the federal level. Um, and really that barrier, and you just hit it, when you go from 80% in a tribal election to 15-20% in a local election, what that has to do is the lack of trust, right? And that's where, like I said, we've got to work on both. We have to have a system in place so that when you have someone from a community who's running, you see that they get on that board and represent you. That's what starts to build trust. That's one element. But also there's
Right.
the communication and informational aspect. What do you care about? Why do you not vote in these elections in the first place, right? Because that's
Hmm.
important.
Hmm.
With our Get Out
Yep.
the Vote, it was that was so successful. It had to do with trusting the candidates from your community, right? Not some outside
Hmm.
candidate. And so there's always there's still going to be that barrier, right? So all of this has to work at the same time, where we have to get into communities and talk about why this is important in the first place, right? What's important to you? Your kids are going to these schools, these things you don't like. There's actually this is a policy question that could be corrected in theory, right? At the legislative level, why are state elections important to you? And that's pretty murky, right? A lot of this stuff
Right.
that affects tribes has to do with the federal policy level, and
Hmm.
so we need to make that connection why a state representative is important, right? So it's a lot of
Right.
communication that has to happen on our end. So, and we're hoping to get that going is one of our goals.
Right. Right. That makes sense. Yeah. Um, can you talk about the plans for the future in terms of, I know you kind of said a little bit more, but you kind of said a little bit already, but I just want to hear kind of like my dreams for the future are, what are the
Yeah.
tribal democracy projects plans for the future?
Okay. So plans for the future. I can, and like I said,
If you're allowed to say, if it's
we're
not top
very
secret.
ambitious, right? And we can talk about what we want to do in 5 years, 10 years. Um, and like I said, it's not just me. There's Jalen. We want to bring other people on board, so we do want to grow. But right now, my dream is proportional ranked choice voting at the legislative level. That's how you get representation, I think, for communities of color, particularly in rural Oregon, which is a lot of our focus right now. So there's this misconception on what everybody talks about this urban rural divide, particularly in Oregon, and the perception is that on that rural side of the divide, it's a demographic monolith with no diversity, right? 100% not true. And you go to counties in eastern Oregon, whether it's Malheur, Umatilla, coming over to Central Oregon, Jefferson, down to Klamath. You have tribal communities, you have Latinx communities, highly disenfranchised. And it's, you know, and the thing is like, okay, we can vote, but we're not going to get who we want in office, right? So your representation might represent 60%, but what about the other 40%, right? And the message I would put across to, you know, across the state, and like, yeah, if you have proportional ranked choice voting at the legislative level, you'll have some people in Portland who will lose power, but it works out in the end for everyone, right? Your numbers don't fundamentally change as far as, you know, the partisan breakdown type of thing. But if you go to Jefferson County and, for instance, you know, a large Latinx community there, Oregon just passed legislation for overtime for folks in these communities, farm workers, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm.
How did this take so long to pass? If you go and talk to the representatives who are supposed to represent these communities, and there is no perspective there, right? They're
Right.
more gears like, no, we need this labor exploitation model so that, you know, my constituents that, you know, vote for me, the people who own the farms, you know,
Right.
man, their labor costs are going to go up, and that's who I represent. Completely
Right.
ignoring a very large Latinx community who just want the same rights as everybody else, right? So that gives you an
Right.
idea of what's going on with when you don't have proportional representation. And
Yeah.
it's just not democratic. Whereas in this system, folks in rural Oregon don't have to go and try to find legislators in Salem, out of Portland. Like, hey, I know you've got your thing going on, but our representatives aren't doing the job here, right? And there's definitely a race element, right? It's pretty clear
Mm-hmm.
cut.
Yeah.
So that's just one example of how, you know, it with the way the system is right now, there's like a perverse incentive to ignore many of your constituents, whereas proportional ranked choice voting will eliminate all of this. And I'm not going to say it's going to be perfect, but at least now you're leveling the playing field to where folks can get representation, because there are large communities that are just flat out ignored. Their issues are ignored. And that's where we can see things, you know, where it's like, how does Warren Springs not have running water for a year? I mean, this is crazy, right? Or whatever, it might not have been a year, but it's a very long time. And it's because you have, you know, representation that doesn't get it done. At the federal level, we have excellent senators. Ron Wyden and Jeff Merkley are first rate, and these guys visit every single county. So I'm not talking about that in particular. But at the legislative level, it's just not happening, and that's what we're talking about here. So did that? I might have digressed.
Yeah.
Did that answer the
Yeah.
question?
Yeah. No, I
Okay.
love it. We're going to take on the Oregon State Legislature, among
Yeah.
other things.
Yeah, that's a
All
long
right.
run. Short run, we have a plan. We want to get this on the ballot for school boards, county commissions throughout rural Oregon, starting with our tribal communities. But we think the more we get this done, even in areas like Jackson County, which might not quite, you know, they have the diversity of some of these other counties, we know that it can get passed there, and we want people to get used to proportional ranked choice voting before we go for the high, you know, the kind of what's viewed as pie in the sky. I don't think it is, but this is happening locally. I mean, it's happening in Benton, it's happening in Multnomah, right? So this is definitely something that is doable, and we think we want to get it done at the local level because we can pass this in the short run right now before we, you know, we're aiming for this high end stuff.
Yes, I love it. You got to come at both angles, right?
Yeah.
We're not just coming from the side. We're coming from the top. We're coming from the bottom. You know, yeah. I like it. We're with you. We're with you. I love it. I'm just so excited about the work that y'all are doing and your organization. I feel energized. Yeah. I think we could wrap it up with a little game if you don't mind, and then
Sure.
maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how folks can support your organization. But I like this. I want to play this little game with you. It's called Name That State. It's going to be really hard. I just want you to know this is a difficult game. I don't think you're going to get any of them. You're going to fail terribly. Just kidding. That's not a nice thing for me to say. You're gonna do great. Okay, are you ready? Let's just go. Let's just get into it. This state has vote by mail, early voting, and ballot tracking, and online voter registration for eligible voters 16 and up, but doesn't allow same-day voter registration. What state is that?
Is that Oregon? No. The
Aye!
16th. Is it? Yeah, Oregon. Let's go
It's
to Oregon.
Oregon.
Oregon. Okay. Yep. The same day
Very
voter
good.
registration. It's like, what the heck? Like, that's the one thing that
All right, ready? Wait, you don't have it or you do have it? Did I get it wrong? Same day? Doesn't allow
no,
same
we
day
don't.
voter
We don't
registration.
have same day. We don't have same day
Okay.
voter registration.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Okay. I hope I didn't mix that up too much. Okay. Here's the next question. I know this is going to be hard. Kate Brown became the first openly bisexual governor in U.S. history when she assumed the role in this state after the resignation of John Kitzhaber. I don't know how to pronounce
Yep.
his name in 2015.
Yep. Once
What
again, that's
state?
Oregon.
Oh,
Oregon again. Yep.
okay. Point for Brian. No points for Heather. I'm not stumping you. Okay, let's try again. In 1887, this state became the first in the U.S. to make Labor Day an official public holiday. 7 years later, there were 29 additional states with official celebrations. Name that state.
I'm going to guess and say Massachusetts.
I'll give you one more guess. It starts with an O and ends in a gun.
Oregon.
Gun? Gun.
Gun. Oregon. It's Oregon again. Is this okay? It's just I had see that I didn't know. Okay.
I know. Sorry, I didn't mean to say Oregon. Nobody who says Oregon. Come on. Us in the Northwest, we know how to pronounce the name.
Yeah, I might have, when I first moved, it took me a few days to figure it out. But what his it's from Arizona. So Oregon again. Okay.
Oregon, yes, you win. You win. Ding 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 ding. Everybody wins. Woohoo!
Seen a theme here. All right.
That's it. Well, that's the game. That's it. I think, thank you just so much for talking to me and talking to all of us out there in the universe of the internet, which I will not call by any brand name because I don't want to and I don't believe it. In it. But yeah, thanks for playing our silly games. Thank you so much for just sharing with us and yeah, being cool. Do you have any parting thoughts? Tell me, where can people find the Tribal Democracy Project? How can they support you and the work that you're doing?
So it's like I said, we're getting all of this stuff set up. So the website is not quite active. It's probably a couple weeks out. And so with the donation and all that other stuff, it's going to be we're through Common Cause Oregon, Common Cause Education Fund is where any donations would go with Tribal Democracy Project. If you were to write a check, I did not have that information ready to go on his with an address and stuff like that. So my bad.
We'll drop the link later. It's all good.
Yeah, I should know better than that. I lecture so many people on this. I'm like, be ready with the links with all this other stuff. Yeah. So, and you'll very soon we'll have links up with the website and all of those great things. It's just taking us longer than we thought. But yeah, so it otherwise, I think we plan to have as robust a social media kind of digital campaign to get things going here in the next few months. So if you're in Oregon, I think you'll be seeing us. So.
Love it. Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Brian Smith, for joining us today. And I'm signing off now for more Equitable Democracy. See ya next time.
Thanks, Heather.